In the year 1337, the world stood between two ages, the last breath of the medieval world and the first stirrings of something new. It was an age where the horse and the sword still ruled, yet whispers of paper, gunpowder and commerce had already begun to reshape empires. If Europa Universalis V begins here, it is not by coincidence. It is because this was the moment the old world cracked open. The time when kingdoms once bound by feudal loyalty began to dream of nations. For centuries, the continent had been shaped by faith and feud. The Crusades were over, their dreams buried beneath the sands of the Holy Land, but their echoes still lingered in the architecture of every cathedral and the scars of every map. The feudal system was growing thin. Serfs fled to cities, guilds rose, and the first banks quietly began to fund kings instead of knights. The medieval tapestry was fraying, and out of its torn edges the future of diplomacy, trade, and empire was beginning to form. In game terms, Europa Universalis V captures this transition perfectly. It's where the mechanics of the old world, loyalty, religion, royal marriages, start to compete with the new mechanics, development, diplomacy, and the rise of true centralization. In the year 1337, the match was struck. The 100 Years' War began. Edward III of England claimed the French crown, and in doing so declared war not just on France, but on the very idea of what a kingdom was. For nearly a century, Europe would be consumed by a conflict that would redefine loyalty, taxation, and the professional army. The backbone of all strategy games. On the fields of Crecy and Poitiers, longbows would pierce the illusion of knightly supremacy. Mercenaries, once a tool of the desperate, would become instruments of power. The wars of kings would slowly transform into the wars of states. In the game, this is where the state system is born. The early mechanics of army professionalism, war exhaustion, and centralized taxation all trace their roots here. To the north, the Holy Roman Empire was an endless puzzle of duchies, bishops, and proud city-states. The emperor's crown glittered brightly, but it was hollow, its power fragmented across hundreds of princes. For a Europa Universalis player, this is the most intricate diplomatic theater in the world. A web of alliances, rivalries, and imperial reforms that never truly unite. Farther east, Poland and Lithuania teetered between strength and vulnerability, soon to unite in a commonwealth that would astonish the world. The Teutonic Order, both crusader and conqueror, held the Baltic in an uneasy grip. A perfect example of early theocratic gameplay, balancing faith with ambition. And across the sea, in the region of Scandinavia, the Kalmar Union was just decades away, promising unity but delivering centuries of rivalry. To the south and east, the medieval Islamic world, the once glorious caliphates, had fractured into competing sultanates. Yet power was far from gone. In Egypt, the Mamluk Sultanate stood tall, a military aristocracy forged from slave soldiers who ruled with precision and pride. Their control over trade between Africa, the Mediterranean, and Asia made Cairo one of the richest cities in the known world. To the east, the Golden Horde, a Mongol remnant, still commanded vast territories across the Eurasian steppe. Their khans ruled over Russians, Tatars, and countless tribes, a fading empire still roaring from its former glory. Soon their power would fragment, and from its ashes new nations, Muscovy, Kazan, Crimea, would rise. In game terms, this is the perfect sandbox for expansion mechanics, the balance between horde unity and the inevitable pull of rebellion. And in Anatolia, the Ottoman Beylik was small, just one among many Turkish principalities, but already guided by a dynasty that dreamed larger than its borders. Within a century, this fledgling power would devour Byzantium and dominate 2 continents. Far beyond the Middle East, the Yuan dynasty still ruled China, Mongol conquerors seated on the dragon throne. But the empire was fragile, held together by fading authority and resentment. Peasant uprisings brewed, and secret societies whispered of restoring the Han rule. Less than 30 years later, they would succeed. The Ming dynasty would rise, bringing order, trade, and the treasure fleets of the Chinese admiral and diplomat Zheng He. Meanwhile, in Japan, the shogunate ruled in name but not in peace. The Ashikaga were consolidating power, but the great daimyo clans simmered with ambition, the seeds of Sengoku chaos already planted. For players, this part of the map embodies Europa Universalis' balance between stability and ambition, the eternal choice between honor and expansion. In India, the Delhi Sultanate controlled much of the north, a realm of Persian influence and Indian resistance. To the south, the Vijayanagara Empire was beginning to rise, a Hindu power that would become the defender of tradition against the tide of conquest. Trade routes, guilds, and temples gave India a unique character, economically advanced, culturally vibrant, and strategically essential for the trade node mechanics of Europa Universalis V. Across the seas, Ayutthaya, Khmer, and Majapahit were thriving in Southeast Asia, kingdoms bound by both conflict and commerce. The Straits of Malacca glittered with merchant fleets, each ship carrying wealth from China to Arabia. While Europe's kings warred, the Mali Empire reigned supreme in West Africa, rich with gold and faith. Timbuktu was a center of learning, and the Niger River a lifeline of civilization. Further east, the Ethiopian Empire stood as a beacon of ancient Christianity, locked in both trade and rivalry with the Muslim sultanates of the Horn. And across the Atlantic, unseen, untouched, the civilizations of the Americas thrived. The Aztecs were beginning to unify the Valley of Mexico under the banner of their gods. In the Andes, the Inca were still a small tribe, destined to forge an empire in the centuries to come. For the player, these lands represent the future, the yet-to-be-discovered continents that would, in time, change the world economy forever. And so 1337 wasn't chosen at random. It was chosen because it stands at the crossroads of destiny, a world on the edge of discovery, reform, and transformation. In Europa Universalis V, it's where medieval mechanics begin to fade, and the modern world begins to form. The old world still breathes, but the air is changing, and with it, the rules of history itself. Europe in 1337 was a continent balanced on the blade of a sword. Every border was a wound waiting to reopen, every throne a gamble of inheritance, pride, and debt. The medieval world had lasted 1,000 years, but now its armor was cracking, and all it took was one royal claim to set it aflame. The year began with letters sealed in wax, not war drums, but their words would unleash both. Edward III of England, a young and ambitious monarch, gazed across the Channel and claimed that the throne of France was rightfully his. A bold statement, blasphemous to some, laughable to others, but to Edward it was destiny. To his French rival Philip VI it was war. That was the spark, the beginning of the 100 Years' War. And though the name suggests a single war, it was far more, a century of chaos, invention, and transformation. In Europa Universalis V, this moment represents more than just 2 crowns clashing. It's the dawn of modern conflict. It's where the player first feels the tension between medieval loyalty and national identity. Feudal levies are no longer enough. Now the state itself must wage war. The English longbow, simple, brutal, effective, changed everything. At Crecy, it tore through armor that had once seemed divine. The nobility of France, once the embodiment of power, fell in the mud like any common soldier. For the first time in centuries, warfare bowed to technology. That is the essence of Europa Universalis, innovation over tradition. Just as the player researched new military advancements, Europe itself began to evolve, not through faith or honor, but through efficiency, logistics, and economy. The age of knights was dying, and in its place rose the age of generals. Behind every victory stood a financier. The Italian city-states, Venice, Florence, Genoa, became the bankers of Europe. They didn't rule empires by sword, but by coin. In the game, their legacy lives in the trade node system, invisible arteries carrying wealth from east to west. Genoa funneled the riches of the Mediterranean. Venice drew profit from Constantinople and Alexandria. And Florence built the Renaissance on the interest of kings. The world was learning that empires are not built on courage alone. They are built on balance sheets. In the heart of Europe stood the Holy Roman Empire, a glorious paradox. Hundreds of princes, bishops, and free cities, bound together under a title that promised unity but delivered debate. Its emperor Ludwig IV held power by tradition but ruled through compromise. In gameplay, the Holy Roman Empire mirrors this perfectly, an endless struggle for reform, influence, and prestige. No one rules it completely. Every action shapes its future. Electors shift, alliances crumble, reforms stall. And yet, within that chaos lies opportunity. Austria, Bohemia, Brandenburg, their destinies begin here. This fractured empire would one day give birth to the most enduring powers of the modern age. To the north, Scandinavia was stirring. Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, small kingdoms of hardy warriors and long memories, were tied by blood and rivalry. The Kalmar Union was still a dream, not yet a crown. In the coming decades, it would unite these realms under one banner, only to split them apart again. A cycle of alliance and betrayal that fits perfectly into Europa's web of royal marriages and succession wars. Meanwhile, the Hanseatic League, a confederation of merchant cities, was rewriting what power meant. No kings, no crowns, just commerce. Their fleets ruled the Baltic. Their influence spread through trade posts rather than fortresses. In-game, they embody tall gameplay, the art of building wealth without conquest. Yet amid all this worldly ambition, faith still casts a long shadow. The Avignon papacy had moved the seat of the church from Rome to France, a decision that scandalized Christendom. Popes, now under French influence, were seen as kings in robes, not servants of God. Corruption spread and reformers began to whisper dangerous words. What if the church itself must change? This conflict between religion and reform is core to Europa Universalis, a mechanic that defines centuries of gameplay. Because 1337 isn't just about kings fighting kings, it's about belief itself beginning to fracture. And yet, as armies clashed and merchants counted their coins, none could see what was coming. The greatest enemy of all was already on the move. Silent, invisible, unstoppable. From the east, through the caravans of the Silk Road, came the Black Death. Within a decade, it would consume Europe. Cities would fall silent, fields go untended, kingdoms lose half their people. In Europa Universalis V, this moment is represented through disaster mechanics, events that can strike even the strongest nations. It reminds players of one eternal truth. No matter how powerful your realm becomes, the world will always fight back. So why begin the game here in 1337? Because this year is not the start of an empire, it's the start of change. 1337 is when the Middle Ages begin to transform into the world we recognize. Economies intertwine, technology accelerates, religion divides. And through it all, the idea of the nation, not the fief, not the kingdom, but the nation, begins to take root. For players, this is where the true Europa experience begins. A world divided by borders, connected by trade, and waiting to be shaped by your hand. The swords are drawn, the coins are minted, the map is set, and the game has just begun. While Europe prepared for a century of blood, the East was still untangling the wreckage left by the Mongol Empire, the greatest land empire the world had ever seen. Its thunder had shaken the earth, and though its armies had long since faded, the ripples still reached every corner of the old world. From Anatolia to China, the Mongol legacy was still alive, fractured, restless, and ready to give birth to new powers. 100 years earlier, Genghis Khan had united the steppe under one banner. Now, in 1337, his empire was divided into 4 colossal realms, each powerful but weakened by distance and ambition. To the west lay the Golden Horde, stretching from the Volga to the Black Sea. It ruled over vast lands and countless peoples, Slavs, Tatars, and nomads, with a mixture of tribute and terror. Its capital, Sarai, glittered on the steppe like a mirage, fed by trade routes that connected Europe to Asia. In Europa Universalis V, the horde mechanics embodied this delicate balance, mobility as strength, but also instability as curse. The player must keep their clans loyal, their conquest continuous, or watch the realm splinter into rebellion. The Golden Horde's might would soon fade, but its fall would create something new. The rise of Muscovy, Kazan, Crimea, and the idea of Russia itself. To the south, the Ilkhanate ruled Persia, the Mongols who had once burned Baghdad but had since embraced Islam. In 1337, their line was failing. Civil wars tore the land apart. From its ruins, new dynasties were beginning to stir. The Muzaffarids, Jalayirids, and soon the Timurids who would carve their empire in fire. This was the frontier where desert and mountain met ambition. For the player, Persia in 1337 is a playground of opportunity, unstable, divided, and rich in trade goods. In EU5's economic system, these lands are a golden hub. Silk, spices, carpets, horses, resources that fuel the global market centuries before globalization even begins. Farther west, the Byzantine Empire still clung to life, but only barely. Once the center of the world, Constantinople was now a relic. Its walls strong, but its empire fractured. Around it, Turkish beyliks competed for dominance. Among them one name stood out, small, obscure, but destined for greatness, the Ottomans. In 1337 they were just one of many, a frontier principality under Orhan Gazi, fighting Byzantines and rival Turks alike. Yet within a century they would take Constantinople itself and transform the medieval world into an imperial one. In Europa Universalis, this moment captures the heart of emergent power gameplay, starting as a minor, surviving and becoming a superpower through skill, patience, and faith. The Ottoman story is the player's dream made real. To the south, the Mamluk Sultanate ruled Egypt and Syria, a military elite forged from enslaved soldiers who rose to power through discipline and brilliance. They commanded the trade routes between Africa and Asia, taxing the flow of goods that passed through the Red Sea and Cairo. Their cities were rich, their scholars wise, their architecture magnificent. But their greatest strength, their rigid military order, was also their weakness. As the world moved toward innovation, the Mamluks remained bound to tradition. When the Ottomans and Europeans began to wield gunpowder and fleets, the Mamluks would face an enemy no sword could stop. In game terms, they represent stability at a cost, an empire powerful but inflexible, prosperous yet doomed to stagnation if not reformed. Across the Indian subcontinent, 1337 was an age of complexity. The Delhi Sultanate ruled the north, a fusion of Persian administration and Indian culture. It was wealthy and sophisticated, but strained by internal division. Regional governors or amirs plotted their independence. Hindu kingdoms resisted from the south. In that same year, a rising Hindu power began to consolidate, the Vijayanagara Empire. Born from defiance, it would become a cultural and architectural marvel, a rival to Delhi and a symbol of Indian resurgence. For the player, India in 1337 is alive with opportunity. It's a world of dense trade nodes, religious diversity, and constant change, perfect for strategic expansion, but equally fragile if mismanaged. And beyond India, the ocean beckoned. Merchants from Arabia, Africa, and China all converged in the Indian Ocean trade network, long before Europeans dreamed of navigation. It was already a global economy, just waiting for sails from the west. In the Far East, the Yuan dynasty, founded by Kublai Khan, still ruled China, but just barely. Mongol rulers sat uneasily atop a Chinese majority that had never accepted them. Corruption spread through the bureaucracy. Famine and unrest grew. The mandate of heaven was faltering. Secret societies like the Red Turbans began to rise in rebellion. Within 3 decades, their revolt would bring down the Yuan and establish the Ming dynasty, ushering in a new golden age. In Europa Universalis V, this transformation embodies the mandate system, a mechanic where dynasties must maintain legitimacy, prosperity, and balance, or risk collapse. China's challenge isn't conquest, it's endurance. Holding such vast territory requires more than armies. It requires order. And when the Ming finally emerged, they would redefine what order meant, building fleets that would sail farther than any had dared before. To the east, Japan was in a fragile peace under the Ashikaga shogunate. But beneath that calm lay tension. Regional lords, daimyo, held their own armies, their own lands and their own ambitions. The shogun's authority was as thin as the paper walls of Kyoto's palaces. In time, the islands would erupt into the Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states, a century of chaos and heroism that Europa Universalis players know well. But in 1337 it was only beginning to stir, the first shadow of a storm that would come centuries later. By 1337 the East was a patchwork of empires, some rising, some falling, all connected by silk, spice, and silver. Europe was not alone in its transformation. The same winds of change, trade, technology, ambition, blew across deserts, jungles, and oceans. What makes this year so powerful, both in history and in the game, is that it captures a planet on the verge of awakening. Every corner of the map tells a story. Every power is a potential empire. And the player, like history itself, must choose which spark to nurture. The old Mongols have fallen, the new conquerors are rising, the world has been set in motion. By the 1340s, the world of 1337 was already unrecognizable. The first battles of the 100 Years' War had reshaped France and England. The Mongol Khanates had begun to crumble. Trade routes glowed brighter than ever, and through those same veins, death was about to travel faster than anyone could imagine. The war between England and France dragged on, not as one long battle, but as a series of sparks. Edward III's new coinage and taxation funded professional soldiers. The old system of calling up feudal levies was fading. For the first time, the state paid for war. France bled, but it also adapted. The French crown centralized, building new networks of loyalty, taxes, and bureaucracy. These are the same forces players feel in Europa Universalis V. The slow replacement of feudal contracts with the mechanics of administration, autonomy, and development. Meanwhile, across the Channel, England's victories brought wealth, but also rebellion. The more centralized a kingdom became, the louder the voice of its subjects. Europe was inventing parliament, not by design, but by necessity. In Italy, the Renaissance had not yet bloomed, but its seeds were sown. Florence's banks grew powerful enough to fund kings. Venice and Genoa turned trade into art. Every coin minted in these cities echoed across the Mediterranean. The mechanic of trade notes in EU5 is born here, invisible highways of profit connecting every port. The Holy Roman Empire still wrestled with itself, emperors in conflict with popes, free cities guarding their rights, electors gambling their loyalty. It was a living laboratory of diplomatic modifiers, the perfect testbed for the new systems of imperial influence and reform. To the north, the Hanseatic League reached its height, a web of merchant cities that defied kings. Their ships carried Baltic timber, English wool, and Russian furs, and their ledgers carried more weight than any army. While Europe argued, a new force crossed the Bosphorus. Orhan Ghazi's Ottomans seized footholds in Thrace, the first Turkish banners planted on European soil. Byzantium, once the shield of Christendom, could only watch. This is where Europa Universalis V loves to begin its stories, with tiny nations that dream like empires. The Ottomans embodied the mechanic of momentum, expand or fade. In just a century they would hold Constantinople, in 3 centuries the Middle East. The map was changing shape. The old lines drawn by Roman crusaders were being erased, replaced by borders forged in gunpowder. Across the east, commerce was booming. Persian caravans met Indian spices. Chinese silk met Arabian silver, but each exchange carried a hidden passenger, a tiny bacterium that had waited centuries for its moment. The roots that made kings rich would now make graves common. In 1347, sailors from the Crimean port of Kaffa brought it to Sicily. From there, it spread like fire through Europe, Asia, and North Africa. Within 5 years, 1/3 of Europe was dead. Whole villages vanished. Empires stopped moving. In game terms, it's the ultimate disaster event. A global reset that punishes greed and tests resilience. Manpower plummets, income falls, stability shatters. But from tragedy comes transformation. Labor shortages ended serfdom in many lands. Survivors demanded wages, not obligations. Feudalism, already cracked by war, now collapsed under plague. The world's economy and its psychology had changed forever. Even in the Mamluk Sultanate, where the Black Death hit hardest, trade never stopped. Cairo's markets filled again within years. Faith and commerce proved resilient, the 2 pillars that let civilization survive disaster. In the Horn of Africa, Christian Ethiopia and Muslim Adal watched each other warily. Their rivalry would soon shape the Red Sea routes that fed Ottoman and European empires alike. The Black Death was not just a European story, it swept through Persia, India and China too. The Yuan dynasty faltered as rebellions spread faster than armies could march. In the south, the Delhi Sultanate lost entire provinces to famine and revolt. For the player, this decade feels like a universal check on ambition, a reminder that no power is eternal. Even as you build armies and expand borders, events beyond your control can rewrite everything. After the plague, fate itself changed. People looked for meaning in new places: mysticism, philosophy, science. Painters and poets turned grief into beauty. Scholars in Florence began to reread the ancients and whisper a new word: a renaissance. This shift is what Europa Universalis V captures through its age mechanics. The transition from medieval to early modern thought. Ideas now matter as much as armies. Innovation becomes a resource. Gunpowder, printing, and paper money, these were still in their infancy. But the world was ready for them. The century ahead would see knowledge spread like the plague had. Only this time it would build instead of destroy. In Europe, cannons appeared on the battlefield, loud, unreliable, terrifying. In China, the Ming Rebellion would use gunpowder to reshape dynasties. In India, the first forts of stone and fire were built. The age of steel and steam was still centuries away, but its heartbeat had begun. By 1350, the population of the planet had fallen by as much as 1/5. Empires had shrunk, fates had fractured, and yet somehow the world was more connected than ever. Trade resumed, new leaders rose from ruin, and in the hearts of survivors grew a new idea: that human ingenuity could overcome anything. That idea would define the centuries to come. It would lead to exploration, science, and empire. And in the language of Europa Universalis V, it's the moment when the player moves from reaction to creation. The world has suffered, but it has learned to adapt. The map is ready for its next redrawing. The storm has passed, the future waits. The age of nations is about to begin. By 1350, the world was scarred but alive. The kings who survived now ruled emptier lands, yet stronger realms. The plague had stolen half the people, but it had also broken half the chains. The age of feudal lords was ending. The age of nations had begun. New ideas whispered through the ruins. Humanism in Italy, navigation in Portugal, reform in Germany, conquest in the East. Every kingdom, every merchant, every scholar was searching for something larger, a world beyond the map's edge. This is where Europa Universalis V begins to truly unfold. The world you rule is still medieval, but it dreams of modernity. Every province you build, every alliance you forge, is a step toward the age of discovery, revolution and empire. The Middle Ages are about to end. The modern world is taking form.